a little differently. So I think there's been a couple discussions on cross-border remittances, frictionless payments. So I want you to all start thinking about some questions, because we're going to filter questions from the audience. I'm sure you're having a lot after the last 2 or 3 sessions. But to begin with, we'll just kind of kick it off right now. In the spirit of talking about partnerships, my friend over here, Steve, I was texting with him post his panel. So how many of you remember the Transferwise marketing tactics that they deployed early on? A few of you?
That's a few, yeah.
Anybody want to share what that was? No.
Biohazard suits, I think.
What was it?
There were some biohazard suits and naked people, I think.
Biohazard suits, naked people, coffins down Bank of England.
Yeah, and I think the spirit of it was about transparency.
Correct.
Transparency.
Stop hidden fees.
Yeah, transparency and stop the fees. And part of the reason why I bring this up, and I was teasing Steve about it, is the whole notion when Transferwise just started was how can they be different than the banks? And so I found it fascinating, your panel, about the importance of partnerships. And I thought maybe you could just share a little bit about that journey, and then we can talk a little bit more about how we all are interconnected as we are today.
Sure. So we've definitely changed that type of marketing to an extent. I mean, we did a big stunt in Canada 2 weeks ago with a big alarm clock and people having a pillow fight, the message being wake up to hidden fees. So there is definitely still that kind of virality and exciting stuff that we're doing. But I think, especially with what I do with the company, we have to be realistic that banks are not foes and evil guys that we're out to beat. We want to work with them. We want to work kind of for them as well. There needs to be those partnerships there, or else our business wouldn't work the way it's set up today.
And what we found interesting as we were prepping for this is, so Transferwise uses ACI. Flywire and Citi are partners. Flywire, ACI are partners? No, Citi and ACI are partners. So we kind of have the entire ecosystem happening right now. So I'll just kick it off. So disruption. Let's talk about disruption. You're doing about 14 trillion, I think, a day in moving money. ACI is. Transferwise doing, I thought you said $1 billion a month, perhaps. You're doing about 3 billion a year. And Ken, how much are you doing over there?
We're doing a couple million right now. So, order of magnitude or a little bit less.
Yeah, but I think varying degrees of over 40 years in the industry and then on downwards. So I'd love you just to talk a little bit. Maybe, Craig, you could kick off with what's happened over the last couple decades when it comes to disruption, how you've stayed abreast of it.
Yeah, so thanks very much. I'm Craig Ramsey. I'm not Manish, as you can probably spot. They decided they needed the good-looking guy up here as opposed to Manish, so they bring me in at the last moment. So we're ACI. We are an enabler of the technology. We supply to banks, to fintechs, to merchants. Whoever is doing a payment is probably using some part of the ACI software suite to deliver that. My particular responsibilities within ACI are for cross-border payments, wholesale payments, and indeed probably the biggest disruptor I've seen in the industry, and that is immediate payments, which is taking the world by storm at the moment. The $14 trillion a day is a real number, and if you don't know what that looks like, that's $5 million every click is effectively how that number adds up. There's been a lot of disruption. You can't come to a conference without people talking about blockchain. For me, honestly, let's be controversial, I still think it's a solution waiting for a problem. I'm seeing some very interesting use cases, particularly around cross-border. Also, alias management is something we're seeing blockchain appear in the industry as well. Which is kind of interesting. The ability to actually know your payer before you actually send the money is something that the immediate payments industry struggles with. But there's quite a few things going on in the industry at the moment. There's this perfect storm of things like GPI from Swift. There is blockchain still looking for a good home, I think. And then there's immediate payments around the world. And I think those are three massive industry initiatives that are really changing the way that payments will process in the future. Everyone expected immediate payments to affect RTGS and ACH volumes. It really hasn't. What it's affected is cash and check, and those are the two most expensive payment types in the industry. I would like to, make a play at the moment for Transferwise. I am a user of Transferwise as well. I thought I'd better try my own medicine as well, and sure enough, it's a very different experience. When I became a customer, I needed to send some money to Australia, and I won't take too long, but my use case there was I'm an HSBC customer in the UK, and they said, well, great news, we'll charge you £10 to make that payment. But what they didn't tell me was the foreign exchange was considerably worse. And also the way to actually make that transfer meant that it was all going to end up costing me about £35, so let's call it $50 to make that transfer. Transferwise charged me less than 10, so it wasn't close to being, it wasn't even a close race in my book. But the real killer was the credit card charge that came in afterwards, and they charged me £20 to do the cash advance to Transferwise. So it was no surprise when Transferwise approached ACI and said, we want direct access to faster payments in the UK, because now that transfer won't cost me a penny to make it into Transferwise. And I think all these things are really disrupting how the status quo of payments affect the industry.
Yeah, thank you for that, Craig. I think transparency has definitely been trending over the last 2+ years, and it's a lot to do with, I think, some of the disruptors we've seen that are making it very, very visible, but also about what customers expect. And I'd like to pivot, I think, to Mike quickly. I mean, I've been following your business for a number of years, and one of the things that I was thinking about through this morning, there was a conversation around venture investing and the importance of understanding the gap, and in doing so, understanding the niche play, and then going after that and solving for a need. And I'd love to hear a little bit about your story, kind of where you started with Flywire, but then the expansiveness of what you're starting to pursue over the last year or so.
Sure. So Flywire focuses on a slightly different version of cross-border. So we focus on the cross-border receivable as opposed to the payable. So like a traditional remittance company helps people send money abroad, Flywire is focused on helping educational institutions, medical hospitals, and businesses receive money from all over the world. And traditionally, it's very large sum cross-border payments. So our average transaction is 10, 12,000 US dollar equivalents. And we hook right into that invoicing process. And so that's how Flywire works. And we started off exclusively focused on the education industry. So we were focused on signing up educational institutions like Liverpool, Leeds, MIT, Cornell, Georgetown, Brown, those types of institutions that had payments coming in from all over the world and had no easy way to receive them. Even though they were working with some of the top banks in the world, it still wasn't easy, convenient to collect money via credit cards, major e-wallets, or traditional international bank wires. And that's where Flywire comes in. With one relationship, that receiver gets a lump sum disbursement in whatever currency they want every single day, and their payers have all the convenient ways to pay their home currency, and they can pick whatever method they want. So that's how the product works. And we started off exactly that in an educational institution, focused vertical market. Oftentimes people thought we were too narrow, too focused, and then we've advanced over the last, I'd say 2 or 3 years. We've now expanded into the healthcare industry and now into businesses so that any business can accept Flywire as opposed to international bank wires.
I find it interesting that some of the investors thought you were too narrow and too focused.
Yeah, a lot of them.
Because when you look at venture investing and startups, majority of the time you're trying to go after a single problem and to do that really, really well. When you evaluate the disruption in banking, it's about the single use case providers that's gone after a sliver of the entire financial sector. So starting there, doing well, getting the traction you've done, I think just bodes well to, okay, start small and then reach out. And Ken, I'd love to bring you into the conversation as well. I think as a relatively newcomer to the space, maybe you could share a little bit about what you're trying to solve for and kind of your role in this ecosystem.
Yeah, absolutely, thanks. So, with SnapCheck, we're on a mission to really help businesses, especially the SMEs, bridge the digital divide and get rid of the antiquated payment methods that they're using, mostly paper checks, which still account for 45% of international transfers from the U.S., still account for over 50% of B2B payments in the U.S. So, really understanding, a business's needs beyond just the payment is where we play in and feeding into the existing processes. And one of the things specifically around the international transfer that everyone on here knows, out in the audience maybe not, is just the impetus mismatch that happens across borders. Right, the different regulations, the different expectations that come in are really, really hard to solve for because you have different mindset and different people, different cultural aspects. And technology is one piece of that equation, but it's not going to solve the entire equation.
Thank you for that. So just pausing for a second, are there questions out there in the audience? You guys have heard a lot about remittances, cross-border payments in general. Anything you're burning to ask this esteemed panel? None at all?
There's one over there.
Oh, there's one back here. Thank you. I just need to turn it on.
The question's when can we get Manish back? Please don't ask that, okay? I'm staying here now.
What do you say?
The question is, when can we get Manish back?
Hi
Thanks.
there. Hi.
Yeah, we can hear you. Thanks, Pascal.
Pascal, I'll start with an easy question. Subtle hint. So I've heard from every one of you in different words that cross-border payments have a lot of friction in them, right? There's a lot of cost in the system. And we have a tagline here which says, establishing frictionless cross-border payments. My assumption is when you establish frictionless, it costs less. One of the gentlemen said it'll cost pennies or cents. And to me, that means a race to the bottom, i.e. there'll always be an incremental player that will come and provide services at a much lower cost, right? So how can you build a resilient business and monetize when essentially the cost of any type of payment will go almost close to zero from a marginal point of view?
So great question. I mean, Mike, why don't you take that one?
I'm happy to grab that one. So for Flywire, what we did is we focused on a certain segment, and like I mentioned earlier, people oftentimes thought we were relatively narrow, but we were trying to be extremely focused, and we focused on a high-value transaction that we knew was very painful for both the sender and the receiver of the transaction, and we set out to solve pain on both the sender and the receiver side, right? So making it more convenient for whoever's making that payment to do so in a frictionless way, and we knew if we did that, they would see value in Flywire as a payment, as a way to pay. And we also knew on the receiver side, the receivers were having challenges when they were dealing with inbound international payments. And they would see real value if we could actually solve the day-to-day pain of reconciliation, incoming wire fees, even just supporting payments from 220 countries and territories. So we found two value equations, and we solved that. And so, we sit at a position where, unlike, I think, traditional remittance, there isn't a race to the bottom in our space because we've provided real value to both sides of that equation, and it's not just a cost game. When there's real pain, I think you can identify that. There's always going to be pricing pressure in the markets and in certain currencies, and we're able to handle that because we're not just simply trying to win off cost.
And can you talk a little bit about which side of the equation do you charge?
Yeah. So we actually sign up our client. So our client is the receiver of money. They sign up to a multi-year exclusive agreement for Flywire to process international payments. So these are our client relationships. We have over 1,400 across 18 countries, and they're with educational institutions, businesses, and hospitals around the world. And so that's our client. And then where we attach ourselves is in that billing process. So when someone's looking to pay a British pound invoice, they can pay in whatever currency and whatever payment method they want to. And so that FX charge can either happen on the sending side or the receiving side, depending on what gets invoiced out by the biller. And either that payer is going to pay that reduced rate, or on the settlement back to the receiver, they're going to have the opportunity to settle in whatever currency they want. So it's really configurable depending on how the client invoices out, which sometimes is in local currency, and sometimes it's in the actual destination currency, the currency in which they give the goods and services.
I think that it speaks to that sometimes free isn't always best. Like consumers and businesses are willing to pay for value if they see that. And
Yeah,
Steve,
I couldn't agree more.
yeah, I just want to ask Steve quickly, because it's one thing you didn't talk about in your presentation, and then we can go over to Craig. Because I know, Craig, you've built your business over 40 plus years, and so I think you can probably say a lot to that. But Steve, as you think about the economics behind Transferwise and knowing that it was at a better price point, you had lots of transparency, it was frictionless and the like. My understanding is you've started to open up the business to the business side of the world, so sending money from B2B or B2C, et cetera. Can you talk a little bit, is that where you see some economics playing more favorable to you?
Yeah, I think maybe 6 months ago, a year ago, the standard line was we're 90% consumer volume, clients 10% business. And I think that's changing very rapidly. The typical use case of I want to send £1,000 to my family member in Australia, we're now having corporates coming to us saying, I want to send £13 million to our bank account in US, for example. Of course, on larger transactions, it's probably more favorable commercials. And so we are, of course, actively expanding into that pace. We're getting lots of requests, treasury services, those types of things. So I think that's something that we will be doing more of in the future as well.
And your expansion into that space was based on customer demand?
Yeah. It wasn't necessarily something we set out to do. We set out to solve a problem of moving money between UK and Estonia, or UK and Euro at first. That was the original problem. Hidden fees, high costs. But what we've actually seen is the individuals who've used that service, maybe CFOs, CEOs from companies, have had a good experience and say, why can't my company use this? So they're saying, well, I'm a customer, but I want my company to be a customer as well.
That's great to hear. Craig, how about you?
Yeah, I was going to agree on the point of, the actual processing of the payment is not where the value lies with a corporate or a consumer. It's about the speed of the processing. It's about the value add around the outside. And as we see the standards change globally for cross-border payments generally, and there'll be very, the Fintech market will certainly be pushing the boundaries of this, but I'll say something controversial. Don't expect the banks to be the innovation space here. They simply are not. That's not what the banks are typically delivering. And we see that especially in Europe, where we're being told to open up the banking market with PSD2 and the open APIs, where some of the banks are seeing it as a pure cost to open up their banking systems, to make payments and to be able to deliver balance and transaction data, whilst the fintechs are actually taking all the benefit of adding the value around the outside. They're providing the innovation channel that consumers and corporates are looking to buy. But that's really the wrong way to look at it. Open API is something that is going to take more and more pace in the world to take on, and we're seeing places like New Zealand and the US are looking to get on board with Open API. And for the innovation, for the banks that are a little bit more innovative than others, then there's a real opportunity there as well to market themselves as the payment rails. Because whether we like it or not, the way to make a payment is still through the banking system. And if you close your doors and say, I'm not playing with any of the fintechs, I'm not playing with the innovation space, then you're going to die pretty quickly.
So there are other questions out on the audience. I can keep asking them. Yeah, up here at front. If you can get a mic up there, thank you.
Hi. You know, when it comes to cross-border payment, I think the word which has been repeatedly in this conference much more than any other word is blockchain. I can see Transferwise or other companies doing a normal way of like remittances, but it go very fast. What was the blockchain? What do you see for cross-border payments and remittances? Are you using blockchain? Are you planning for it? Do you think it will change the way we are doing our businesses today?
Okay, so let me just repeat the question back to make sure we heard it, which is, what type of change are we going to see that may drive a different agenda in cross-border payments, particularly around blockchain?
Blockchain, yes.
Blockchain or other technologies that you maybe consider, may consider adapting to based on. I don't know if you want to touch on that first, Ken, and then we can hit TransferWise.
Yeah, so I think blockchain has some huge potential all over the place, right? So I think the application of blockchain for consumer use cases is tenuous at best. I think for banks and as a general clearing mechanism, cross borders to disintermediate the clearing banks is a huge opportunity to open up the world to easy, frictionless money movement. Kind of tying this in with the previous question, most of the cost or the fee that goes for a person-to-person remittance has nothing to do with the underlying cost of the payment itself. It's the cash in, it's the cash out, and it's the regulatory obligation, right, is where the entire cost is. So, and then the difference between Joe's remittance service and Western Union is I'm going to Western Union because it's Western Union. That's why it costs me 3 times as much.
All right, I think we've just got time for one more question. Do we have one more question from the floor?
Yeah, I think there was just, did you want to respond to blockchain in general? Please, then we can
very quick answer. We are watching blockchain, of course. We've talked to guys that use it, but I think like the other guys said, we're yet to see kind of a scalable consumer use case that exists, a startup that's managed to make it work, a fintech that's made it work so far. It could well be something in the future, but right now it's probably more of, as you say, a solution looking for a problem.
Thank you.
No one's going to wake up in the morning and go, I must make a blockchain payment. That's going to be behind the scenes. It's all about how much they want to pay, when they want to get it there, how quickly they want to get it there. And blockchain will just be another delivery mechanism alongside many others.
Thank you, Craig, for that. Is there one more question out on the floor before we wrap?
As you guys probably know better than anybody, there's a lot of players operating in this space. So just curious to hear your thoughts as to where the future of cross-border payments goes and if you see any collaboration or convergence with some of the folks operating in the industry.
Mike, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, sure. I think for Flywire, we've always had great banking partnerships. So we work with Citi as well as some of the top global banks. Actually, today we're announcing a big deal with First Data that hits probably in about 2 or 3 hours for global card processing. So I think those relationships are critical, and they're with more established players and with folks trying to change that industry or trying to do new innovative things. So I think you have to have those partnerships, and I think they have to go beyond simply getting the press release out there. They have to go into actually driving value and driving results. And if you can do that, I think the partnerships between kind of new age technology and established firms, I think are really, really powerful.
I think that's a common theme of this conference in general. Any other comments?
I would say just very quickly, we have about 10% market share in the UK, which means other providers probably add up to about 5% or so, I don't know. But there's still a vast majority of the population is still using their bank. So although there's a huge number of, especially digital online players operating in Europe and US, there's still a huge number of consumers who aren't even aware of the problem, the hidden fees and the high charges. They just use their bank because that's how they've always done it. So there is definitely space for these guys to grow, us to grow, other companies to come in. I think until there's 90% not using their bank, there's still space for that.
So last question for me from the panelists. So there's rumored that Apple's going to be moving into the P2P space, making announcements soon. Would you bet or not bet on them moving into the cross-border space at some point in time? Graig?
I don't care. I'm an enabler. They still need technology to enable. And whether they do that through a banking system, through fintechs, through their own technology, they still buy software, and I'm a software vendor. What do I care?
And that's what you get when you're around since 1975, right? An enduring business model.
I'm not trying to be facetious, but I think there was a question about, what do we see for the cross-border industry? Right now, it's faster for me to grab a bag of cash and fly anywhere in the world through an airline ticket. Let's assume customers are working with me here. But it's faster for me to fly that cash to anywhere in the world than it is to make it electronically. It costs me a lot of money.
Unless you use Transferwise.
But there needs to be a change of price. There needs to be a change of speed. And if I was Swift, I would be rather worried right now, because that's not the way of the future.
Okay, so on that note, thank you all for joining the panel. Much appreciated. Thank you for your questions, and hope you all enjoyed the conference.
Round of applause for our panelists. Thank you.